Welcome to Vintage Hollywood Archive. Jean Arthur was an American Broadway and film actress whose career started in silent films in the 1920s and went on till the early 1950s. Arthur had feature roles in 3 Frank Capra films: Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, You Can't Take It With You, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. These films championed the everyday heroine and the over-the-top strong woman who still needs a man's aid. However, there was so much more to her than pencil skirts and being a maiden in distress. What was Jean Arthur's darkest secret? Make sure to watch the video until the end, and if you are new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to our channel. Jean Arthur's dark days in Hollywood. In the 1930s, when so many women in America were still stuck working in the kitchen and nursing children, one actress in Hollywood became a star by playing independent women who worked for a living, competing with men in a man's twisted patriarchal work. Her name was Jean Arthur. Just 5'3" and bestowed with an unprecedented husky, alluring voice, Jean never could bring off the role of the obedient wife or the sit there and look pretty beauty. The wisdom she had was not quite attainable. There was a certain admirable perseverance about her. Even with this dark, compound nuance in her character, through utter flair, charisma, and dedication, she became one of the finest screen comediennes of the golden age of Hollywood. Delightful, pleasing, and amusing, Jean Arthur was one of the greatest actresses of Hollywood's golden era. Although these days she's most popular for her comedic work, Arthur wasn't constricted to only funny films, being able to perform in everything from melodramas to crime pictures. Still, it's easy to see why her comedy talents are famous to this day. She was able to bring the manic, unhinged energy of screwball comedy to all the movies she starred in, diffusing them with an electrifying changeability. Like Beckham bending his football, Arthur was able to bend the tone of every film she was in, making projects bow to the power of her screen presence and helping them evolve and become more complicated cinema in the process. James Harvey has written in his history of The More the Merrier, no one was more closely identified with screwball comedy than Jean Arthur. So much she was a part of it, so much was her star personality defined by it, that the screwball style itself seemed almost unimaginable without her. She has also been called the stereotypical comedic prodigy. Her last film, however, was non-comedic, as she played the homesteader's wife in George Stevens' Shane. Like Greta Garbo, Arthur was preeminent in Hollywood for her truthful disinclination to publicity. She never signed autographs or granted interviews. Life magazine observed in their 1940 article, "Next to Garbo, Jean Arthur is Hollywood's reigning mystery woman." As well as shying away from interviews, she steered away from the photographers and avoided them at all costs. She refused to become a part of any kind of publicity, be it for the fans or the camera. She wanted to act, she said, simply so she could become someone other than herself. The Fox Film Studio had spotted her while she was working as a commercial model in the early 20s. She signed a short-lasting contract and then debuted in John Ford's cameo Kirby in 1923. It was around this time she changed her name to Jean Arthur, paying homage to both Joan of Arc and King Arthur, who were her on-screen heroes. Her absence of professionalism and discomposure in front of the camera also set her career off the track. After having been fired from her second film, she struggled in comedy shorts. After which she was hired for a series of B-westerns on location in the gruesome hot California desert, a grueling experience for her, which she vowed to never do again. Jean Arthur was born Gladys Georgina Green in Plantsburg, New York, to Protestant Christian parents Joanna August Nielsen and Hubert Sidney Green. Her Lutheran maternal grandparents had immigrated all the way from Norway to the American West after the Civil War had ended. Her Congressionalist paternal ancestors had immigrated from England to Rhode Island in the early 1600s. She was the 4th child her parents had been blessed with, the first 3 being boys that were loud and rowdy. Her 3 brothers, Donald, Robert, and Albert, were born in the West. Around 1897, Hubert moved with his wife and 3 sons from Billings to Pittsburgh so he could work as a photographer at the Woodward Studios, where Gladys was born 3.5 years later. With her parents moving around all her childhood, Jean Arthur in her adulthood lived at times in Saranac Lake, New York, Jacksonville, Florida, and Schenectady, where her father had grown up and a few of his family members still lived. The Greens lived on and off in Westbrook, Maine from 1908 to 1915, while her father worked at Lamston Studio in Portland. When they relocated in 1915 to New York City, the family settled in the Washington Heights neighborhood of Upper Manhattan, where her father worked for Ira L. Hill's photographic studio on Fifth Avenue. She dropped out of high school during her junior year because of a change in family circumstances. It had taken a toll on both her mental and physical health. Indicating many of her future film roles, she was a stenographer on Bond Street in Lower Manhattan during and after the First World War. Both her father and brothers registered for the draft during the war. Her brother Albert died in 1926 as a result of respiratory disorder suffered during a mustard gas attack in the First World War. Fox Studios came across Arthur. She was doing a commercial modeling in New York City in the early 1920s. The newly named Jean Arthur landed a year-long contract and debuted in the silent film cameo called Kirby, directed by John Ford. She apparently took her stage name from her greatest heroes, Joan of Arc and King Arthur. At that time, Fox was looking for new American heroines with abundant sex appeal to interest the jazz-age crowd. Arthur was remodeled as such an individual, a flapper and a bombshell. Following her insignificant role in her first-ever film, she received her first female lead role in a movie called Temple of Venus, a peculiar, plotless tale about a group of dancing nymphs. Not satisfied with her absence of acting talent, the director of the film, Henry Otto, swapped Arthur with another actress called Mary Philbin during the first day of shooting. Arthur agreed with Henry. She was planning on leaving the California industry for once and for all, but with much reluctance stayed due to her contract and appeared in comedy shorts instead of films. Despite knowing that she lacked the talent, Arthur appreciated and liked acting, which she thought of as an outlet. To receive some fame, she signed herself up in the Los Angeles Photo Directory as a photo player operator. She also appeared in promotional films for a new Encino nightclub, but the efforts were fruitless. Things took a turn when she showed up at the lot of a studio called Action Pictures, which produced B-grade westerns, and was able to impress its owner Lester F. Scott with her aura and stage presence. Lester decided to take a chance on a complete stranger, and Arthur was cast in almost 24 westerns in the span of merely 2 years. However, only receiving $25 per picture meant Arthur suffered from difficult working conditions. The films were barely successful in second-rate Midwestern cinemas, though she received no significant attention. Other than appearing in films for Action Pictures between 1924 and 1926, she worked on some individual Western films including The Drugstore Cowboy and Westerns for Poverty Row, also having an uncredited bit in Buster Keaton's 7 Chances. In 1927, she attracted more attention when she was cast beside Mae Bush and Charles Delaney as a money-loving chorus girl in the film called Husband Hunters. Following that, she co-starred with actor Monty Banks in Horseshoes, which was a commercial success. She was cast on Banks' request and was given a salary of a whopping $700. After that, director Richard Wallace neglected Fox's wishes to cast a more skilled actress by giving Arthur the female lead in The Poor Nut, which was a comedy film and made more people notice her. Tired of the direction her career was traveling into, she said she needed an extended break in an interview at the time. She was suspicious when she was given an insignificant role in the movie Warming Up, a major production by Famous Players Lesky, featuring star Richard Dix as the main protagonist. Warming Up promoted as a sound film, and it gained wide media attention when she earned flattering comments for her role as the bar owner's daughter. Gave way to signing a 3-year contract with Paramount Pictures at $150 per week. She was amongst the several silent action stars of Paramount Pictures eventually unwilling to adapt to sound films. Learning about how popular sound films were and that they were not just a temporary thing, she set up a meeting with a sound coach, Roy Pomeroy. Her unique throaty voice, paired with stage training in the early 1930s, was what helped to make her popular in the talkies, but it at first made directors hesitate from casting her. In her initial talkies, her unique voice was just not there. Whether or not it had come forward yet, or whether she hid it, is not concluded. Her first talkie was The Canary Murder Case, in which she was casted beside Louis Brooks and William Powell. She managed to impress only a few with the film. In the initial years of the talkie films, Paramount Pictures was known for casting Broadway actors with experience and skill. Arthur was not one of those people. She found it difficult to maintain a persona, and her peculiar relationship with the executive David O. Selznick. Despite her relationship with Irene Selznick, proved worthwhile, and she was labeled as one of Wampus baby stars in 1929. Followed by a silent B western called The Stairs of Sand, she got some positive reviews while playing the female lead in the production of the mysterious Dr. Fu Manchu. She was given many more assignments, which she completed successfully, though her hate for cameras and interviews still grew. Through Selznick, she got her greatest role to date when she was casted as Clara Bow in the film The Saturday Night Kid. Followed by a role in the movie Halfway to Heaven, Selznick told her to play William Powell's wife in Street of Chance. She was unable to flatter the director, who said that she moved back to New York because she could never make it in Hollywood. In 1930, her relationship with Selznick came to an end and her career at Paramount was over. She played multiple lifeless roles in mediocre films, and once again she debuted on stage in December 1930 in Spring Song. Back in Hollywood, she saw her career falling apart, and she dyed her hair blonde in order to change her appearance and avoid comparisons with successful actress Mary Ann Bryan. However, her attempts were futile. Upon the termination of her 3-year contract in 1931, she was told it was because of the financial instability of the studio. In the end of 1931, she came back to New York where a Broadway agent chose her to play in an adaptation of Lysistrata, which opened at the Riviera Theater in 1932, immediately after which she made her Broadway debut, and most critics were impressed by her work on stage. She married Frank Ross Jr. the same year. She returned to California for the holidays and played in The Past of Mary Holmes, her first film in 2 years. Back in Broadway, she was often seen in small plays that got barely any attention. Critics continued to praise her despite all of that. Her return to Hollywood was in late 1933, and she turned down multiple contract offers until the time that she was asked to have tea with an executive from Columbia Pictures Studio. She was willing to star in Whirlpool, and during the making of the film, she was offered a long-term contract which offered financial aid for an extensive period. Although she was hesitant to give up on her stage career, she did sign the contract in 1934. After playing as a tough-to-break girl with a pure heart, her popularity began to climb the ladder. With her obvious rise to fame, after starring in multiple popular movies, she was able to get several contractual concessions from Harry Cohn, which included script direction and the right to make other films. What we can call, the vertex of Arthur's career was when she was chosen by Frank Capra to play in Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. He had seen her in A Daily Rush during the production of Whirlpool, and she unknowingly convinced him to have Columbia Pictures to assign her his upcoming film. In 1936 only, she made $119,000, which was more than what the President of the United States. With fame also came media attention, which she greatly disliked. She did not like attending social gatherings like parties and steered away from anything that would require her to socialize or talk to people she was not acquainted with. She was therefore called the American Greta Garbo, who was also known for her very private life. Her next few films did not receive much praise, and she was stripped of the rights to a break. In 1937, she was cast a working girl in Easy Living, a screwball comedy which was followed by the famous and major hit film You Can't Take It With You, which won an Academy Award. She remained Columbia's top star until the middle of 1940s, when she decided to leave, and Rita Hayworth took over what was once hers. Arthur retired when her contract terminated in 1944, and for the next few years, she practically turned down all film offers except 2. One of which turned out to be the biggest hits of her career. Her work before retirement was sporadic, somewhat curtailed by her unease and discomfort with working in public. She had established a fear of performing on stage and some fits of psychosomatic illnesses. A perfect example was in 1945, when she was cast as the man protagonist in Born Yesterday. Her nerves and insecurities won, and she left the production before it even reached Broadway. After Shane and a few other Broadway plays, Arthur went into retirement for a bit over a decade. In 1965, she came back to business in an episode of Gunsmoke, a popular television series. In 1966, the very private Arthur took on the role of Patricia Marshall, an attorney on her very own television sitcom, The Jean Arthur Show, which was canceled after a dozen episodes. After that, she decided to teach drama, first at Vassar College and then at Northern Carolina School of Arts. In 1973, she made the front page of a local newspaper by being arrested and jailed for trespassing on a neighbor's property to console a dog that she thought was being mistreated. She was charged a fine and given 3 years of probation, after which she retired once and for all. She took refuge in her oceanside home in Carmel, California, adamantly refusing interviews until her resistance was broken down by a determined who was writing a book about Capra. She even once said she'd have her throat slit rather than giving an interview. Jean Arthur died from a heart attack on June 19, 1991, at the frail age of 90. No funeral services were held, as requested by her. She was cremated and her remains were scattered in a river. For her great contribution to the Hollywood film industry, she has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She left behind a legacy no other could. It was not her voice perhaps that brought her this far, but the silent films she acted in perhaps. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new here. Being a woman in a male-dominated Hollywood is not easy, and it has its side effects. How Joan Blondell's Hollywood career led her to lack self-esteem? Find out in this video.